Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Bull. So today's case deals with a guy named Richard. He's actually from a very poor background, doesn't have that much money, and basically they're saying like, oh, he killed his fiance Layla because for whatever reason. And the reason why they're saying that it's because it's an interesting case because he actually confessed, but there's a lot of extenuating circumstances to his whole confession and everything. Basically, he was interrogated for 11 hours. He asked on multiple occasions, could they let him go? It comes down to like, okay, well, if he's not guilty, why would he confess? Well, it's because he was basically pushed to the limits, and he just to say anything just to get out of the situation that he was in. And it's an even more particular case because originally Bull was actually originally hired by Layla's parents, particularly like her dad. His name is Gavin. He's actually worked with him in the past before. And, it kind of makes me wonder, was it back when Bull was kind of doing work for money, or was it just because he was like, oh yeah, Gavin's the right dude in that situation? I forgot what the circumstances were for the exact case, but it does make you wonder at what point in time, was it the Bull that we see now, or is it the Bull that we don't know, the Bull from the past? And, he references in this episode as well as last week's episode about how the fact is that back then he only took cases for money. It wasn't really whether it was like, whether he was doing the right thing or looking out for the best for his client or whatever. It's like, no, I'm getting paid and I'll do my best, but it's like, really, I'm only here for money. But now it's like, I'm here because of the person. So that was kind of interesting. It was really interesting when the dad kind of punched him in the face, when Bull was trying to explain. Wasn't expecting that to happen. It's understandable because you would like, the parents are like, it's like you tricked us. You thought you acted like you were on our side. We welcomed you in, and now you're just like going to work with the guy that killed our daughters. You son of a bitch type of thing. So, essentially for this case, they had to basically pick a jury that would basically kind of understand where Richard was coming from. That basically is like, hey, easily, people who are easily duped into a confession, like basically put someone, people whose minds are kind of malleable enough that you can kind of get them. It's just like, they're just kind of like, oh, I guess you're right. It's like, I guess I did do this thing, even though I didn't really do it. Just kind of like, I guess not the word is weak-willed. I forgot what the exact word would be, but it's just, They break under pressure very easily and would confess to something that even though they didn't do it. And that's a big part of the trial. Also, it's also about because that was what the biggest part of the trial was, like breaking Richard's confession. Because he didn't really kill his wife, but it's like, that was the biggest damning thing against him was that his taped confession. And because even though the evidence was all circumstantial, they found him in a daze and stuff like that. He was just kind of on edge, just found out his wife had been murdered, interrogated for 11 hours. So it's just there was a lot more to it than that. Right off the bat, I'll admit, I kind of had a feeling it was his best friend. Just because, obviously, you have a little more leeway as the audience. It's because, when you see the person pushing her, it was someone in a suit. And I just assumed it was his best friend because, well, for one, using, TV context clues, the best friend not best friend, but his friend that was at the party with him never popped up once the entire episode. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. Well, I'll get to it in a second, but let's quickly talk about the detective in the case, Murphy. Now, Murphy seemed like, he might be a dirty cop or something because there's a lot of stuff. He wasn't a dirty cop. That turned out not to be the case, but there's multiple things, Obviously, the reason why he came to the conclusions that he did, it made sense. It's like if you weren't looking hard enough, you would have overlooked some of the stuff he did, like that evidence that was basically part of a cufflink or whatever. Even Danny herself was like, I wouldn't have noticed that if I wasn't paying enough attention. Then the fact is they're looking for a piece of rebar was the weapon, but it's like, no, she was pushed into the dumpster and the kind of side of the dumpsters is like a bar. So it's almost like rebar, kind of probably the same shape and kind of hardness of a rebar. So that's why they jumped to that conclusion. But you end up finding, well, plus he had a CI, but he didn't mention that CI is you're not supposed, obviously it's all about protecting your confidential informant, but at the same time it's just he didn't put that out there anywhere, but it's to protect their identity. It's that's why he was so hard on Richard is because he was dead set. It's like, oh, I have a witness. It's like, oh yeah, he did it. He dragged her body around and kind of tossed her like she was a piece of trash. Because that was kind of the key word, because Richard actually used that when Bull kind of pushed him, which is kind of interesting seeing that other side of Bull. Like, basically, he's like, you're not ready to, go on the stand. Which, interestingly enough, he never actually went on the stand in this episode. I guess it wasn't necessary because I guess in his state, they wouldn't have been able to get him in a state of mind to be able to do it, because he would have flown off the handle, because Bull kept pushing him the way the prosecution would. And I guess, I don't know, like, Bull, did he ever specifically say what he was in the past, that he was a prosecutor or something or not? I'm not 100% sure, or what he's the defense attorney, whatever the case may be. But he went after him pretty hard, which is kind of interesting seeing that side of Bull, but it's, him playing the role and everything. And then it's like, he's like, then he kind of shouted at, it's like, oh, I threw away like a piece of trash. And it's like, see what I mean? You're very emotionally vulnerable. And it's like, you kind of, this is just me doing it. It's like the jury's going to really love the fact that you saying something like that out loud. But I mean, that ended up the key sign. Like, oh, obviously he got that information from someone, because he was like, oh, he's a dirty cop, or the fact that he's hiding a CI. Turns out the person he was hiding was the real killer the entire time, Richard's friend. Apparently there's like a whole sexual assault thing that had kind of got expunged from his record. So what it seems like, I mean, we never really got the motive as to why he did it. I mean, he ended up confessing or whatnot under like an hour or whatever. But it seems like maybe it would have been a situation like he was trying to do that to her, and then she kind of like, resisted, and that's why he pushed her. Like, he wasn't trying to make that happen. I mean, but, a douchebag is a douchebag, whether he was trying to kill her or not. He was still trying to do something else. So it's like, it doesn't change the fact that he's an asshole for it. And then trying to blame someone else for the crime. I mean, because it's kind of understandable where Richard comes from, like, because basically there was kind of problems in the relationship. They literally got engaged. They'd only been engaged for like 2 weeks or whatever. So it's kind of a newish relationship. But it's like the way you hear him talk about Layla and how they met and everything, about how like basically he saved her from her first date. It's just like he could totally tell she wasn't feeling the guy. He kind of helped her out. She was kind of swept off her feet a little bit. And she's like, you know what? She basically sat and waited for him to get, to shift it in, and they basically, because he's actually like a chef, makes some pretty good food and whatnot, but he's not the most well-funded, but that, it's kind of interesting. Her date with some dude ended up turning into her first date with Richard. It kind of was like, you transition over from a terrible date to a good date in just one whole situation. I just think in one night that all happened, so I just thought that was kind of interesting. But basically, she wanted to invest in him because he didn't have a lot of money, but he didn't want the relationship to be based around that. Because a big problem with the relationship is the fact is her dad didn't like him. We don't really know how the mom felt about him. It's like mom didn't really say much, but dad was very even going as far as calling him a loser. That's what sparked the whole argument between him and her that led to her walking out and leaving. And it's like, I'm gonna put this out there. It's like, never walk down a dark alley by yourself. Man, woman, child, it doesn't matter who you are. Never walk down a dark alley by yourself. I'm pretty sure one man known as Bruce Wayne can attest to that. Never walk down a dark alley. And even if you are with someone, still don't walk down a dark alley. It's like the moment she start walking out, it's like, so this is really, that's how this is going to happen. It's like, don't do that. I don't care how upset you are. Always be in a place where you're surrounded by a lot of people. It's just a key thing to go by in life. I'm just saying, it's something to always keep in mind. Dark alleys are a no-no. Even if you happen to be with friends, still dark alleys are a big no-no. I'm gonna leave it like that. I make it because before I was making it seem like, oh, if you could go down a dark alley as long as you're with other people. Because using that same Batman point, it's like, well, Bruce was there with his parents and it stopped that whole situation from happening. So even when you're with other people, just avoid dark alleys in general. So just how I'm leaving it up to. I really like how Bull actually kind of convinced some of the remaining jury to kind of be on his side, because he was able to, got some of the extra juries, the one that weren't necessarily 100% on his side, ended up getting them stuck in an elevator with him, and then Cable, being a little sadistic, kept dropping it a little bit, because even Bull kept looking up at the camera like, what the hell? And Marissa had to be like, yo, Cable, what are you doing? She's like, I'm sorry, that's why I warned you shouldn't give me this much power. And then when it was all said and done, Bull was like, you know what? Let Cable know that she's on dishwashing duty for the next couple of days. So It's kind of like it was kind of interesting seeing that type. But I guess considering what her job is, the fact that she is a hacker and everything, it's like okay, I guess it makes sense that like it's like oh, you're giving me this much power to like. It's kind of like oh, life and death of people's. It's just kind of like the power to freak people out and everything. It's just like oh, like just seeing that sadistic side of her was very nice. I also love the line that kind of started this whole episode was when like Marissa was asking, well, she's like, okay, so the fact is you see a tape of a guy making confession to saying that he's guilty. And, most people will look at him and be like, okay, he is guilty. You happen to look at it and think that he's innocent and you turn away a huge check. And he's like, yep, it's just great being me. It's like, oh God, I love how sometimes it's hard to tell whether he is necessarily that self-centered or is he just, I think it's just him being part of him actually being a very funny person when time comes. So, but overall, a very good episode, and I'm very interested to see what next week's episode is about. I did catch a little sneak peek. It does seem like we will be getting the return of Liberty. She was the kind of second, I guess, I feel shitty saying that second tier lawyer, because basically her boss was kind of treating her like shit, like, oh, you're just kind of like basically she was treated more like an assistant than actually a lawyer, but basically she didn't really seem like she had that much confidence, but Bull kind of, had her kind of take charge of the case. It ended up being the first case of the series, so it seems like she's coming back next episode. So that's going to be interesting. So I'm guessing we're going to take the opportunity to say, like, some of these characters we will see kind of pop in and out, especially, I don't remember her name. It's, I forgot, her name was, it's the actress Jill Flint from last episode. Lindsay was like her last name. I forgot her first name, but I'm sure like she'll be a character we'll definitely be seeing. I'm still waiting to get an episode where we get Benny's sister / Bull's ex-wife to kind of get a dynamic on that, because I want to see more about that, because Bull is still an enigma. It's not even just him. We learn little tidbits here and there about everyone in the group, but it's like I want an episode dedicated to a lot of people's past. It makes you wonder whether there'll be a situation where Bull actually has to take a case for either himself or someone on the team. It's like, oh, someone on the team got charged with something, and it's like he has to use his whole tactics to help that situation. It's very interesting. I feel like I don't never give like the system that they use, the kind of computer system that they what's it called, attacked. Like I don't give it enough credit for like the things that it does. Like the fact is it graded people to see how susceptible, and that's the word I was looking for earlier. I was being a complete idiot to it. Like susceptible to kind of people's words of being like, oh, you did this, didn't you? It's like, no, I didn't. It's like, you did it, didn't you? Okay, yes, I did. That type of situation. So I don't know. Like, I don't give that credit because it's a combination of Bull plus, it seems like Marissa does a lot of the more technical stuff with that. Maybe it's a combination of her and Cable. Like, it seems like she kind of gathers a lot of the data, and Cable's the one that kind of puts it into the system and stuff like that and gathers the information that they need. But it seems like when it comes to kind of the number crunching of like the probability of stuff like that, for instance, like, she brought up the possibility as like, oh, like 60% of people are kind of forced into confessions even though they're innocent, something like that. And even Daniel was shot like, really, 60%? That's crazy. Because even Cable was like, kind of brought it up at the beginning, like, I would never confess to something I didn't do. That's kind of what the whole big thing in this case was. So it was just a very interesting episode, just of how like, in the right circumstances, how you could end up confessing to something you didn't do. I've kind of brought that up before without getting too into my own life. I've kind of been in a similar situation, and I kind of took blame for something that I shouldn't have taken blame for, but I think I've talked about that like a little while ago in the video, but it's just, I'm not really going to go into it here, but that's all. Once again, just a really nice episode. But that's really all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.